So, as you know, the incident that took place in Minneapolis with George Floyd certainly was a big spark of many protests throughout the country and many people joining in the Black Lives Matter movement. I've been very consistent on this opinion and what Officer Chauvin did to George Floyd. Just terrible. It's terrible. It's murder. But with that being said, I believe the George Floyd family is making a big mistake here. Let me explain why. As you know, listen, it's terrible what happened to George Floyd, but I think it is important to share some background on George Floyd. The fact that he pointed a gun in a pregnant woman's stomach. Just a bad dude. He wasn't a good dude, and I don't care what his family members say. He was a guy that was in and out of jail, a criminal. Did he deserve to be murdered? Absolutely not. But there's a reason why I'm bringing up his past. A 3D hologram of George Floyd will now make its way through the U.S. South this week, temporarily replacing former Confederate statues as a symbolic call for racial justice and solidarity. I wouldn't have had as much of a problem with this if it was like a Black Lives Matter sign or a guy like a Philando Castillo, right? If you remember, Castillo was shot. This was a good man who worked a good, hard job. He was a good father, never got in trouble with the law before, and he was killed, and it was horrible. So if Castillo had his hologram throughout the country, you know, as a symbol for an innocent African-American man being killed by a police officer, I wouldn't have a problem with that. I have a serious problem with a convicted felon, a man who held up a pregnant woman, pointing a gun to her stomach, a drug addict throughout his entire life. And he was committing a crime even moments before his death. Again, did he deserve to die? Absolutely not. Did he deserve to be murdered by Officer Chauvin? Absolutely not. But I have a problem with this. I think this is overboard. This is overkill, for lack of a better term. I'm not comfortable with George Floyd's image put throughout the country. I agree with the Confederate sites. I think it should be a case-by-case basis that should be voted on by politicians. No, I do not think that regular everyday citizens should be putting graffiti on property that is not theirs. I don't agree with that. They should go to jail. But that's a different situation. Why should we have George Floyd's picture everywhere? There are plenty of innocent people, sadly, that have been killed by police. Castillo being one of them, by the way. You know, he was a good man, horrible. But I don't want a convicted felon's picture everywhere. I don't want it anywhere. Yeah, I understand. The site where he died, I get it. That's a symbol. That's okay to me. Am I wrong in thinking this way, JD?
Well, I think it further divides the country, obviously, considering the fact that the Confederate statues are mostly in the South. And, yeah, George Floyd, people don't like it when you bring this stuff up, but he did hold a gun to a pregnant woman's stomach while her entire house was being robbed and invaded. And by all accounts, he was pretty much a career criminal. So, yeah, I'm not a huge fan of this either, but people are going to do what they're going to do, and I don't know. That's the George Floyd thing's been going on for 3 months, and it's resulted in about.
Has it been going on that long now?
Yeah, about 15 to 26. Wow. Yeah,
3 months already. Wow.
Well, let's see, 2 months. I'm sorry, 2 months.
Yeah,
yeah, and it's resulted in 15 to 26 million protesters nationwide. The virus has spread significantly since it. There's been a lot of looting and rioting. There's been thousands of police officers that have been injured. Another one was just killed today. There's been a lot of things that have resulted of this that have not been great. And I'm not a huge fan of this because George Floyd, the human, in my opinion, was not worth commemorating in this regard because of just the things that he did over the course of his life. And when he was killed, his toxicology report did show that he had fentanyl in the system, he had meth in his system, he had marijuana in his system.
Well, that's not what I'm really worried about.
There's just a lot of things that I don't think that you should commemorate someone like this when they really, in my opinion, George Floyd isn't John Lewis. He's not Martin Luther King. He's been compared to Jesus on multiple occasions.
Listen, I don't agree with that.
There's been a lot of these comparisons, though.
I don't
and
agree with that.
They're just completely inaccurate.
I don't think that should take away from, like I said before, what Officer Chauvin did.
Well, obviously, Officer Chauvin.
Yes, I think it's overboard.
And 99.9% of the country agrees with that. 99.9% of the country thinks that Officer Chauvin, 98.8, was a murderer, second degree, third degree, first degree, whatever you want to say, but he was a murderer. Now, granted, what that particular hold, the knee to neck, was legal in Minneapolis Police Department at the time. But George Floyd and George Floyd, if you listen to or if you read the transcript, he didn't want to be in the police cruiser. He said he was claustrophobic.
Yeah, but we're
he
talking
requested to be on the ground.
We're getting off kilter here.
How are we getting off kilter here at all?
It's very simple.
No, I'm saying the country.
You agree with me? Hold on.
The country agrees that George Floyd was killed.
Okay, all right.
But the reaction the last 2 months is as if
but we're getting off
1% of the country agrees.
But we're not.
It's been totally falsely misrepresented based on how the country feels about George Floyd's death.
But I'm not talking
and I think
about
this, as you do, I think this is a little over.
I'm not talking about protests right now. We're just talking about these holograms
right,
that are out,
I understand.
and these Confederate sites, which I agree with you is, as I mentioned to start the segment, is inappropriate. If it was Philando Castillo, I wouldn't have a problem with it. Would you?
Philando Castillo?
Yeah.
No,
he's
I
a good
wouldn't.
man. That would be different. I'm just telling you, I would feel different.
Or you could have Breonna Taylor.
Yes.
For example,
that's another example.
Although we've never actually talked about that.
I'm saying
but in Louisville.
I'm saying I wouldn't have had a problem if they used one of them
Sure.
for these sites. I have a problem with a convicted felon. I do. So you mentioned a little bit about JD. We can agree on things.
Yeah, that's fine.
It's a record. We agreed on something today.